Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So he's carrying the ram horns on his head. Now the ram horns
You also have
from
the
my
owl
diagram,
in
the ram horns from my diagram represents instinct, represents that fundamental cause and effect. It's got to do with the fundamental power that becomes the extension of the will. The will is born out of it. And so this is our, like, what's driving us forward. This is why we relate it to the head, because we relate the head to our thoughts, right? In modern cosmology. But what drives us forward is actually our instincts. Even our thoughts are driven by our instincts. And so this brings us to this interesting picture, which I see as an inverted ram horns, but it's also, if you look at it, it's also two circles above his head. So it represents the unification of the Ida and the Pingala and the Astral and the Etheric, which means that it's the Trimurti. And the Trimurti is like the word tree. Murti in Vedic cosmology and Muti in African is very similar. Your Muti here is your magical things that you're making. Your magical work is your Muti. Now, Murti in Vedic has got a whole lot of string of associated meanings. It can relate to your Murti is relating to your circle, your people you're connected to, but also to your works, your occult works and knowledge. If you say someone, it means he's got a lot of sacred knowledge of the divine arcane. So it's very interesting because it relates to these two circles of the etheric and the Ida. Now, I've got a picture here that I wanted to share with us, which I think is quite important to understanding the difference between the astral and the etheric on a visceral level. And it will give us a real insight into, I think, so here we have a pentagram, right? And here we have 108 degrees. And here we have 72 degrees. And then we got the same here and the same here. And for each of the 5 directions, we have the 108 and 72 degrees as being the fundamental two sides of every angle. So now we're looking at a very interesting perspective here of how the 108 and the 72 come into being. Now, when we look at the Vedic cosmology, specifically, we're looking at the nature of the astral and the etheric. When we consider the Kabbalah and the Western occultism, we've assigned it to the number 72. Now, if we look at what 72 represents, it represents 64 angels under the direction of 7 archangels, under the direction of the Yahweh, if we will, right? So there's the 8th fundamental angelic being in charge over the 7 archangels, and these are ruling over the 64 lower angels. This is sort of how we have our 72, where it comes from, and we can see this sort of reflected quite well in the older works of the Essenes, where they actually break it down quite nicely. We did a round table about it, where basically told the whole story of actually, for those of you that haven't watched it, go and check it out. Previous round table, it's worth looking at. It's really going into Gnosticism, but not all that crap that everybody else is talking about on YouTube, because they've all read the same books. We're taking it from we literally just took this Gnostic story of creation, took it apart and went through it from beginning to end, and just basically pointed out certain things which are inherent in all of our traditions, which is really interesting. But getting back to the 72, what we call the quinence in Western occultism, which is really what we base everything on. We then have the other side of the coin, which is 108. Now, in Vedic cosmology, we use 108 as being the relation. There are 108 names of Shiva, of each of the deities. These are compounded by 10, so we could say there's 1,080 names, because these 108 are permuted through the cycle of 10. Right? Interesting there, Kabbalah, cycle of 10. To form 1,080 names of Shiva, of Brahma, of whichever deity path you're walking. And there's always these 3 paths. There's always the Vaishnu, the middle path. There's always the Shiva, right, the ascending path. And there's always the Brahma, the descending path. bringing towards us that spirit of Sarasvati's emanation, which we experience. And there's this juxtapolarity. Now, in classic Vedic cosmology, we see that the 22 paths of the Sephirot, which is essentially where we come to our cube of space from, because the cube of space has got 12 intersections. If you examine a cube very carefully, it's got 12 intersections, and it's got 6 outer faces, and it's got 1 inner face. So when we take the 12 and we add the 7 to it, we end up with the 19, the number of the sun. And then within this, there are 3 axes connecting the cube, right? Connecting the different aspects. So the up and above is connected by a single axis. Right and left is connected by a single axis, and forward and back is connected by a single axis. So we take these 3 axes and we take the 12 connecting points of the faces, and then we take the 6 faces themselves, and we then end up with and include the central face, because it's another direction you can travel in. You can travel inwards, or you can travel in each of these directions. You end up with 22. So 22 is the number of the cube, the sacred number of the cube. And so we're looking at the Saturnian cult of the cube, the etheric worship.
Just to add to that point, I don't want to detract from your flow, but the 2 and the 2 as well. Of course, the 4 that would create the 4, which is the 4 elements. But if you take just in Arabic numerals, the 2 and reverse that, reverse the front, or 2 and reverse the front 2, and put them together, you get the love heart. That sort of quintessential symbol of the love heart. You see that in iPet Goat 2 as well, quite a lot. And of course, it links back to the Tiferet, right? The Tiferet is that central axis, the axis mundi, the cosmic pillar, right? So I think there's, and of course the love heart as well there, with that 2 and the 2, it almost seems like you have that, that hemispheric aspect to it, similar to the brain as well, right? The brain has that same hemisphere. So yeah, it's quite interesting. Please finish your point.
Yes, but that is really quite fundamental, because when you take that cube apart or collapse it, like you say, you are now looking at the Merkabic forces, which is the other side of the coin. The Merkabic forces also work on a vector equilibrium, and the equilibrated forces, vectors of all of these different aspects of the Merkaba or the hexagram, when you expand it out, it comes back to 64. So it takes 64 vectors to produce a vector equilibrium mathematically, which is the reflection of the hexagram, which is the Merkaba, which is rather interesting in itself. So I think there's some mystery to do with what you're talking about in relation to the shared symbolism between the Merkaba and the cube. But getting back to the cube, so the cube relates to the number 22, and it relates to shape. It relates to shape, it relates to form. It relates to sound that is phonetic, and that the sounds have shapes, and that the cymatic shapes of the vibrational tone of sound is what's responsible for causing matter to conform to particular patterns of substantiality. And then we're looking at the other side of it, where we have the qualities. Now, the qualities seem to be, from the Vedic perspective, we're looking at the 108. And the 108 is rather interesting, because we're looking at nine planets with going through the 12 signs of the Zodiac.
Exactly. Yeah.
So now we're looking at the 9 planets. Now we're looking back at this image, right? So we're now looking at the N8. Here we are dealing with the 7, right? And the 7 principles, when we look at the 7 principles and we go, well, the 7 principles break us down into a very interesting, simple way of understanding the Hermetic principles. But notice the memory and the will. They stand between 2 spheres. So the astral field has its own will, and the etheric field has its own will. So there are 2 different wills. Even though they're one will, this will has to polarize in order to become a junction for these 2 spheres to touch. And the same can be said for memory. So when we look at memory as having 2 elements, and will as having 2 elements, we then end up with the Ennead, the 9 principles, which is quite interesting how the 9 breaks out of the 7. And the 7 is fundamentally an expression of the 3, because there are only really 3 fundamental principles that are repeating themselves in different octaves.
This appears in the Sephiroth as well, with of course the 7 lower or unmanifested, you could say, pardon me, manifested or conscious Sephiroth, and then you have the 3 higher, Bina, Hokmah, and Keter. Of course, omitting that, which is the 11th hidden one, but again, hidden because it's that idea of, well, you have to go through the middle, you have to, sort of parse the middle, go between the point of temperance or knowledge, that middle pillar, become the grey man, if you will, so that you can understand this world. Between the black and the white tesserated floor of masonry, the grey men, the masons themselves, would be well, they are the ones who believe themselves to know that middle pillar. So that's the idea.
And that's a contradiction, right, there that I think we find, is because they think of themselves as gray men in certain cases, but they don't. It seems like they're not. It doesn't seem like they are truly going down that middle pillar. And then even in our symbolic representation of grays, like this idea of this alien force, they're just certainly not a center pillar force either. So I'm wondering why this distortion exists.
Well, I think that's got to do with the etheric plane. So look at the etheric field here. The etheric field has its own polarity. The will being the upward current, the sensations being the downward current, the instincts being the balance between the two. I correlate the instincts to being the 6th principle of Hermes, representing cause and effect. I relate this to desire. I relate desire to being the body through which instincts are finding extension. And so when you fixate yourself within desire, on the etheric plane, you are in polarity, you are in the balance between will and between sensation. And thus desire becomes the engine through which will manifest the sensations that you want. So it has to do with free will and choice. And so this on a fundamental level, you could say that the desire is the balance, is the middle pillar of the etheric field, if the etheric field is separated from the astral, and if the astral is separated from the causal, the spiritual. So in a sense, I think this is what they are. The play on words is there, and this is going to bring us back to those beings and where they are, why they are where they are, how they found themselves where they are, why they had to be imprisoned there and not here or somewhere else. So we look at this cube of space, which relates to the 22 fundamental archetypes, which are what our languages are fundamentally based upon, right? In terms of the original 22 pictograms of Paleo-Hebrew, which is really what is fundamental to the ancient Egyptian Coptic, right? Which comes from the pictorial language of hieroglyphics, maintaining that jump between the hieroglyphic astral language and the phonetic etheric language. So we switched from the astral language of hieroglyphics, which is all about the imagination and the metaphor and the concept, into the shape of sound, and defining the shape of sound as being a letter. In other words, this is what allows manifesting. It's what lets matter become shape, these letters. And at some point, the distinction between the astral and the etheric became greater. I believe they used to be working in synchronicity in a golden age in the past, where people were more in tune with their feelings, but we started to repress our feelings. And I think the repression of feelings had a lot to do with hegemony of control.
Yeah,
because we weren't allowed to be ourselves. We weren't allowed to be our natural instincts to connect with the imagination and the intuition. And so the instincts were kept caged away from the imagination, caged away from the intuition, in order to allow for the will from the outside to program us inwards, rather than for us to transcend into the will that can drive us through the imagination into the higher memory where we find intuition and inspiration. And so this fundamental structure of the etheric field, which I consider to be the cube, which is based on the 72, which is based on 22 archetypes. Now, in India, we have 22 tonal system for the music of the ragas. That is for healing the body and for healing the mind. But then they have a system of working with the 108 names of the deities for the mantra in order to attain to the spiritual potential. Very interesting how this distinction is there. And so the 22 bars of music became and are related, I believe, to the 22 archetypes of the 22 Paleo-Hebrew, which are what has become the Coptic and the Egyptian, which has basically become the ancient Greek, which has basically become the Latin, which has basically become English, and all the other languages between Latin and English.
Well, absolutely, yeah. You're moving, pardon me, you're moving to a more mechanistic view of everything. So from that pictographic or hieroglyphic lettering system, that script, you move towards a more mechanistic, like what you're saying, something that doesn't just allow the manifestation of thought, but it seeks to curtail thought into a sort of standardized paradigm. Absolutely, that sort of phonetic system. Another thing to mention as well is that the cube itself, if you take all sides of the cube and you interrelate them, you extrapolate that interrelation, then what you find is the 7th point in the middle, and then the abstract point, which you can draw out as the origin point of the cube, obviously creates the 8th point. So this is why the 8 is sometimes associated with, for example, it is associated with Ishtar, of course, right? Even Venus, the star of Ishtar as well, is an 8-rayed star. Again, it's the Empyrean, it's the vortex in its orthographic projection, its 2-dimensional projection. So another thing to mention with the 72, so of course, you have the 36, 72, 108. Those are the 3 or the tria prima that make up the pentacle, if you will, in terms of the degrees. Interesting, all of them add to 9. So if you look at 9 and 6, and I think this is probably why it was developed, the 9 is the ascent of the vortical spiral, or one section of it at least. The 6 is the descent of the vortical spiral, or at least, again, one section of it, right? So this is why you see the mark of the beast being 666, because it's descending through this sort of tria prima of states. Again, from the unmanifest to the partially manifest, the unmanifested to the partially manifested, and then to the fully consciously temporally manifested, the Malkuth, if you will, or the Etheric. So, also as well, linking to the 72, if you take the tetragrammaton of Yahweh and you put it through a tetractys, which is the I guess you would say the
4-dimensional type of
No, it's more like a pyramid. It's a 10-leveled pyramid, and it's extrapolating out the name of Yahweh through these 10 layers. And if you add it all up, it adds to 72. So this is where you get the idea of the 72 names of Yahweh. I'm pretty sure there's 72 demons in the Goetia as well. It's everywhere, isn't it? Yeah. So it's speaking to something of perhaps an extra dimensional or otherworldly nature, which is influencing archetypally the individuals that are here. I've always thought as well that perhaps, again, like what we see with the Yamadutas, I believe it means the messengers of Yama, if I'm not mistaken. They, in Sanskrit, perhaps we're seeing a similar sort of harbinger type who's seeking to propel man into a virtual reality, into a mindless sort of a husk existence. I mean, you see it in Kabbalah with the term klipot, literally means shell. So to really immerse them, to impose upon them a sort of meaningless existence within a diverse panoply of the metaverse and what it can offer. Again, all illusory. None of it really has any bearing upon power, upon the effect of the world, upon man's journey in life. And it's almost derailing him from even beginning the journey in the first place as well, the spiritual journey. So absolutely they're involved in that. I mean, I think it has probably something to do with, we look at the World Tarot card. Again, you can look at that celestially, again, from Regulus and Leo, Aldebaran Taurus, Aquarius Fomalhaut, or it's not Aquarius, it's not the constellation Aquarius, it's the equivalent constellation of Pisces Australis, which is the southern fish. And then, of course, you have Antares and Scorpio. Interrelate all of them. You go to Cassiopeia, which, if I recall correctly, I think from the Greek it means her name has power or something along those lines. So it's the same idea as the Logos notion. But also as well, right above her is Cetus. So of course we go to the Perseus myth, right, of Andromeda, which is the queen of the Ethiopians, and Cetus, the king of the Ethiopians. Cetus, funnily enough, in Greek means gardener. And then we go to the idea of the agricultural human farmers, right? And the way that they're sort of running this global plantation, perhaps, of energy. Or Robert Monroe called it loosh as well. Perhaps we view
Monroe. That son of a bitch. He definitely freaking reframed his experience and what he found out. He reframed it in his second book. Or if he was, I don't know, did he write the second book, or was that? No, he did, right? He wrote his second one.
Yeah, he did.
I don't know if he fully wrote the third one or if he died before. He's dead, right?
Oh yeah, he's dead. I think I'm not sure if he died before the third book. I'd have to go back and check that. But
yeah, with that loosh concept, he went from being highly disturbed to then coming back and kind of reframing it to more of like, well, all energies are loosh, and it's not like we're manipulated into giving the loosh. It's kind of like this is just where that's produced on this planet.
Yes, as opposed to the. Sorry, Chris. Please finish.
Oh no, you're gonna. You know what I was gonna say. As opposed to what he originally had thought and seen, which was more of like a manipulation, where this energetic, emotional sort of energy came from, or what it was needed for, and why it was being collected.
It's almost like sustenance for a higher hierarchy. I mean, that gets to the concept as well that perhaps the imposition of civilization and the hierarchies, perhaps it didn't come from the mind of man. Perhaps it was brought here by Hermes, Mercury, the messenger, again, Thoth, the Atlantean, the idea that these cycles of civilization have been ongoing in an endless cycle, an endless tsunami of cycles, that man perhaps, like what we see in the Yuga cycles and the length and breadth of them in terms of time, go on for millions of years, perhaps, God knows, billions, who knows, right? Perhaps it's an endless cycle. Perhaps as well that the comprehension of time from one moment to the next in our mind is not exactly how it is in the noumenal. Perhaps we just view this all from a sort of phenomenal or material lens. Perhaps there is no time when you reach, again, the immortal realm, which is, of course, what the Masons are all desirous of. I mean, they're clamoring for it, like like the teenagers at a Beatles concert. They're clamoring for immortality. It's quite laughable. They'll never reach it, of course, but yeah, please.
This is so on point to where we're getting to with those beings, who these guys are, where they come. So the Ogias is the Book of Giants. It was actually removed from the Bible, as far as I know, originally. Interesting. One of those 96 books that were removed. And the Ogias is like the story of Shamyaza, and how, and we find this various different translations of this. We find it in Syrian, we find it in Persian, we find it in Arabic, we find it in other Semitic languages, probably Paleo-Hebrew. I think there's Greek version of it. We find a different version of the story in the Norse tradition, but it's the same story. It's pretty much going the same story. And so if we go into this, they used the Fika oath. Now the Fika oath, imagine the universe as being an interconnected web, a network of beings that are connected through a unity of form and cause and alignment, and that this network of beings is really a seeming kaleidoscopic, expansive life of one being, which is essentially a fractal expression of all of these beings connected in the proverbial chain. And this chain of all these beings, they took an oath, and that was the Fika oath. And that Fika oath became the substrate through which this manifestation, this reality, could then be compressed into what we're experiencing. And then the story is that there was like some of these beings that broke away and they wanted their own freedom, and they aligned themselves with the giants who were on Earth. And that these beings were then working with these giants, and they were taking form here physically, and the agenda of control over humanity had been at its worst, and humans were being basically just about mined as food, or farmed like food, like farm animals, essentially controlled, used for our labor and what have you. And then there was this great war, these great wars that came, and Shemyaza and his little crew. In other stories, it's Gabriel, Raphael, Michael, and Auriel that stepped together. But regardless, he used the Fika oath, which I believe is the Tetragrammaton, which is really the manipulation of the etheric field, the manipulation of the acoustic shapes that make up the etheric field. And so the story is that these were buried in the bowels of the earth, proverbially, the underworld. The bowels of the earth is the underworld, which I relate to the etheric field. Shamanism, we have the underworld, we have the divine world, and we have the middle world. The middle world is what we would call the astral world. The divine world is what we would call the causal world, and the underworld is what we would call the etheric field. And these three parts of dream time are the construct through which the dream of reality is being manifested through these three fields in interaction. So back to this image.
What do they do? What do they do with this? What do they do with the forces that you said they were manipulating?
Sorry?
You said they were manipulating this etheric force into a particular shape.
Yes.
What is it? What is this? Continue there. Don't lose that.
This is where I'm getting to. So these three spheres are in a loop, and so that loop means that the upper and the lower are connected. The astral is that which stands between, and the etheric is that loop that sort of controls our doorway in and doorway out through the will. And so this was basically being used by the Fika oath, by Shemyaza, in order to open up the underworld and force these beings into a pocket that was carved for them in the underworld using the Fika oath, using the Tetragrammaton. A space was created for them where they were trapped and imprisoned in, where they were bound to be waiting until the end of this epoch, where they would then be churned out and dismembered, in a sense, by the proverbial exhaust of the universe. And so they are clinging on to existence.
Does this sound like another story, Silas?
It sounds like the Tartarus, doesn't it? With the Titans and such. Even the Asuras and the Devas, that idea where, well, it changes in Hinduism, but I'm pretty sure in Buddhism, they got drunk and they fell from Mount Sumeru or Mount Meru, if I'm not mistaken. And it's also similar to this idea of revelation, where, you know, I believe the sort of hell spawn, they're all cast into the bottomless pit for 1,000 years, and then they rise, and then after they're completely cast down. But it's similar to Saturn as well. Saturn is a chthonic deity. It's a deity of the sort of inverted Sephira, because it's sort of neo-Kabbalism, but there is an inverted tree of life. And you could say this is the roots of the tree of life, and the roots of the tree of life exist sort of in that state of the void, right? That they are growing powerful within the darkness. They're seeking out the light in the darkness, because they don't have the light within themselves. So it's the same idea as the Promethean fire, where man wants to use technology to externalize his own will and use the will to literally control the spirit, to control the heavens, to control the godly domain. And of course, as Yuval Noah Harari states, literally colonize everything. They colonize all of the universe in a sort of Star Trek Borg type fashion. I mean, you couldn't make this up. That's honestly, I remember reading this for the first time in both Homo Deus and 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, and my jaw hit the floor. I couldn't believe that he would be so candid. And he also mentioned as well, he mentions, of course, very misanthropic things, but he mentions this will be the new God. This internet of all things and the algorithm will be the Lord of all things, or somewhat similar to Pashupati, right? I believe, the Lord of all animals is sometimes, or like what you're saying, the Lord of all animalism, this idea of atavism, or descending back to a primitive state. Though it has the pretense of high technology, we're actually spiritually underdeveloped, because it seems that the more we technologically advance, that we actually have a sort of disproportionate regression in our spiritual advancement. We become less spiritual the more we technologically advance. It's quite interesting. It's almost similar to what you were saying with the upper and the lower, the two, the ascending etheric and the descending astral, if I recall correctly, and of course the red, the sort of vibrating, or I guess you would say flamberged, or oscillating serpent in the middle, the red one. So yeah, I think there's something to that as well. There was something else I was going to mention, but it slipped my mind.
It's interesting too, thinking of the beginning, or at least the beginning of our modern technology that we have, at least in our history, and like how they were doing seances basically. The seance was their science, and how they were kind of trying to get information from entities that seemingly were outside of our realm. And it seems like they were the entities that were thrown in this void that Franklin was just discussing.
Well, that's exactly what they say in the Gnostic tradition too. Well, not all Gnostic traditions, I must stress that. Some of them. I think in the Setian Gnostic tradition, it talks about this notion of the pleroma, which is the fullness of the white light, essentially, of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the Kenoma, where Yaldabaoth was cast to, which means void, or the abyss. Exactly. And so,
Same
of course,
story.
Same story, exactly. It's very strange, isn't it? Everywhere we go, it's comparative. Yeah, it's almost like it's harkening back to a primordial truth. Sorry, Chris.
You know, it's interesting. Zodiac and its etymology. It's basically a circle or a wheel of animals, and it also has the words like Zion is related to Zodiac.
Yeah,
and it makes me start thinking, like, is this zodiacal wheel of time that we're like the constellations and this sort of knowledge, is this just an earlier trap of technology that was placed on the people who think they're in control now, who use that as sort of a way to manifest things that they currently manifest?
They are looking back at what they call the wisdom of the ages, which is basically another metaphor or allegory, a synonym, a hidden synonym for this notion of a civilization where they almost claimed total immortality, but unfortunately in their blind hubris, they destroyed everything. And there was only a few that were left, right? Thoth or Hermes or Mercury, the messenger of the gods being one. I mean, when they talk about the gods, they believe they are the gods. I mean, I know
Yeah.
it's insane, but they don't mean
Least-
gods as in
At
a
least
sort
that
of
or the fallen, like they believe their bloodline related to like some sort of god.
exactly this notion of the blue bloods and all of this. I mean, you look in Kabbalah as well. It also mentions in the Zohar that when one sees blue or sapphire, that it is a sort of devilish color, which shouldn't make sense because obviously it's on the right hand side of Hesed or kindness. But if you worship the fire, if you worship destruction, then of course it would be a terrible thing to see in your dreams, right? The blue. Oh God! Oh, get that away from me. That's it's too nice, too good, too kind. Well, that's the only way I can explain that, at least. Of course, as well, there's the notion of the feminine, the mare, which is the deep blue sea.
The ice.
So
Yeah,
if you see
fire
the
and
blue,
ice.
you're seeing the female, right? The female is bad. We cut the Asherah poles down. We totally bury that sort of feminine well, it's an allegory, but the feminine principle. So we bury the heavenly, the noumenal. We can only exist in the sort of phenomenal, will-related realm, and anything out with that we destroy. It's the same with science. Science does that today. It's reductive. In fact, all religions are reductive too, in large part, bar a few notable exceptions, where they just, well, yes, we believe in God, but we anthropomorphize God. We anthropomorphize the first principle. You know, we try to put a name to it. It is the old man in the sky, right, wearing the toga, or carrying the thunderbolts. Basically, everyone has that Sky Father image, and again, the Sky Father is that which overturned the divine and ineffable Mother, if you will. So you have that notion. By the way, another thing with mem or memory, we're talking about the Zodiac here, and of course the Akashic records, which has, I guess, in a sort of metaphysical manner, has all possible knowledge in this sort of vastness of the mercurial ether, right, for lack of a better term, the field. Mem is the 13th letter. The 13th point, though there's some disagreement on this, is potentially Ophiuchus. Now, Ophiuchus is basically the fool. Now, he's, of course, there's a paradox there, right, with Ophiuchus. Is he dancing with the serpent, or is he wrestling with the serpent, or is he doing both? It's the same with the fool. Is the dog hearkening him over the precipice while he's staring blindly at the sun? Or is the dog, of course, Sirius, the sort of esoteric sun, if you will, is he warning the fool, or is he doing both? Right? So again, the mem is the Ophiuchus. It's the center of the Zodiac. It's the center of all archetypes. It's that which encompasses all archetypes, because it is fundamentally the origin point of all archetypes. It's the sort of, it's the center of the wheel.
I think that's so on point, because if we look at the word Ophiuchus, or Ophiuchus, as I like to say it, then obviously the P and the F are interchangeable because it's a masculine and a feminine iteration of the same consonants. So per and f are really we're focusing on the feminine, but if we masculinize that, we have OP. Okay, so OP as in, like, it relates to that, like, operation, right? Which is like the connection of the R with the P and the E. The E is the yod, which is creating the seed for what will be. The R is that which is connecting it to everything else, and the P is the mouth through which this sound is being conditioned and spoken into word, deed. So the OP, and then Ea, you have to have Ea in that because it's Enki's original name, right? Ea, it's the first deity name that there is. And then Chais, Opiaches. If you look at Ches, and it becomes known in more modern versions of Germanic and different languages from that branch, Ches means spirit, which is quite interesting, you know. So we're looking at the word spirit, the spirit of Ea, with this sound and the vibrations, and this is now the embodiment of the Fika Earth, and that Fika
Yes.
Earth is the tetragrammaton, which is the three worlds of the shaman, right? The Yod, the Vav, and the He, which are all reflected back in the second He, which is the permutation of the second He when it's got the potential of Yod and Vav
Yeah.
meeting within it, becomes the second He of the tetragrammaton. So it's the three worlds of the shaman. It's the Ishia becomes the embodiment of the other three states of being. Those three interlocking circles that I was talking about here, right? Those three interlocking circles are interlocked in the fourth sphere, which with what we call this matter. Now, this is very interesting because according to some of those notions in those old stories, and like you say, there's different versions of the story. The Shemyaza somehow beat the giants by giving them access to the Fika Earth. And because they got access to this Fika Earth, they abused it. And they changed the modulation of reality. This is where it gets really fascinating. They changed the modulation of reality to suit themselves. In the process of doing that, they locked themselves into a jail. And so you could say that they put themselves in their etheric prison that they are trapped in. And of course, they reflecting the hierarchy of the 72, because they were all about the will and about the etheric plane and perfection of the etheric. So the will was how they manifested. When you look at the 72, as we mentioned before, there are 64 angels, 64, 128, 256, 500, and, you know, what is it? 508,
28.
2000, and 1016, 2032. Is that it? Like,
Musical,
we're talking about
musical,
computers.
yeah,
I believe
AI.
it is, yeah. I forget the actual sequence now, but I think you're on point.
Yeah, sorry, it's 14, 28, 56. Anyway, this all comes back to 64. So those 64 permutations of the etheric field are essentially what we're talking about. Sorry, excuse my throat. I've got a little bit of a frog in my throat. I think it's from climbing the mountain in the rain yesterday. But I think we can sort of get an understanding of the way in which this prison was constructed. And I think they constructed the prison by abusing the 72 potential, abusing the etheric plane in order to lock us into a cage. They locked themselves into a cage. And so the result of them locking themselves into an etheric cage means we are here. Okay, so this is now getting interesting. When I drowned when I was 3, the first thing I noticed was, okay, well, you know, the whole universe is loud, it's vibrating, and there's different frequencies. And as the frequency gets higher, I'm moving further from that, whatever I was in. And there's 3 things. So the universe is made out of 3 things, these 3 spheres. This is all there is. That's why it's blue, yellow, and red, the 3 primary colors, right? And so these 3 things get taken out of each other. And within each of those 3 things, there's another 3 things. It's like, oh, wow. So there's 3 things, and each 3 things has got 3 things, and they're taken out. And the whole thing starts to unravel, and they get pulled apart like strings. And your memories are at the core. And so as these things are unraveling, your memories are going, and that's scary because you now have to forget who you are, who you love, your parents, father, whatever. And so you're being like taken out of who you are, is removed from you. And that's when you start to get to that place where you start to see through that, and you start to pierce it, and you start to see where you come from. And the immediate thought, now I was 3 years old, right? 1978. Suddenly I'm like thinking, I'm like an adult consciousness. So I'm a child, I'm 3 years old. Now I'm understanding the universe from a different perspective because I'm no longer 3 years old. I'm a different age. And I'm noticing, damn, how did they trick me to be in there? First thing, like conscious now, At 3, I don't have any formations of any theories or philosophies or ideas or ideologies or beliefs. Nothing. I'm 3 years old, right? I know nothing about nothing. It's just a pure experience of what's going on. Hence, there's no dramas and nonsense. It's just watching the universe turn inside out, watching it unravel, the 3 aspects torn out of each other, watching as the vibrations are getting faster and the louder and faster and louder and faster and louder and faster and louder, that the whole universe is just one big sound. And I'm like, wow, this is intense. And then I'm like, memories stripped out of me. And then I'm like, no longer who I used to be. I'm now someone else, right? And I'm like, how the hell did they trick me to being in there? Recognizing that that's not my home, I'm not from there, and that I've been tricked into being trapped in there, but now I'm actually coming home. I'm like, thank God I'm coming home. Shucks, that's weird place. This is all I'm reeling at the memory of this weird place I've been trapped in. And at that point, I'm brought back, right? Because my body's taken out of the water. So there wasn't any drugs involved. I wasn't in an operating theater. There was no morphine or anything. It was just the agony of drowning. The only drugs that happened was when this little thing in your head pops and the juices come out. And that's when you feel the vibrations. And then the whole universe is just, you hear it. You hear it all. That's how you're traveling. You're traveling on your ears. So then when I came back into my body, I realized, wow, this is all just dream. We're living in a dream, and the dream is inside out. Because when you leave your body and you're going there, everything turns the right way around. They inverted reality for us. They managed to invert reality somehow, using the Fika Earth, using the ability to manipulate the etheric plane in order for them to keep us what they thought was trapped. But in the process of trapping us, they trapped themselves in their own ignorance. Now, their only way to not be dissolved and lost in the echoes of time is through us.
Oh, shit.
We are their only opportunity for them to hang on to life.
Yes,
And
this
so
is the
now
same
they
as,
need to prey on our spiritual potential in order for them to try and reinvert reality back their way.
But wait, if the only way for them to return is us, does that mean the only way for us to return is them? Are we in a symbiotic relationship that's also parasitical because they haven't learned how to stop that shit?
Well, this may relate to actually the atomic structure of that toroidal moment, which is again the hourglass shape, right? Which is again all men are stars, right? Climb high, climb far. Your goal is light. Your dream the stars, or something along those lines, as it says in Masonry. So we are all pinpricks of light amongst this void of the Kenoma. We're sort of little fragments of the pleroma which sits behind that veil of that void. And like what you're saying, we're almost like the hourglass or the figure 8 or the solar analemma. We are sitting between the lower and the upper as man. We're almost like the serpent itself. We're like the spine. We connect the lower with the upper. We're like the magician of the tarot deck, right? This sort of prima materia in that sense. But it really does. It does make you wonder, because the way I look at it is the way Inception put it forth. I think it was Inception, that entire movie was this idea that we see in Hinduism of Brahma dreaming existence into being, and this sort of Maya aspect, this illusory aspect that's of course built into the dream, right? And we can, it's ironically, or no pun intended, it's tangible to us, this illusory aspect of the dream. And you see with the Inception, within the dream, you almost have white blood cells, right? which act as an immune system to maintain the dream, to maintain the reverie of it, to maintain the equilibrium of it. So you have the unconscious NPCs, which are projections of the dreamer.
It's the same idea as Matrix and Agent Smith.
Exactly.
Or
yes.
all the agents actually. I wouldn't say Agent Smith actually, but the other agents. Anyone could be an agent, and then they attack you once you start.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And you have the Scarlet Woman as well, because again, like Isis with the veil, he Neo, literally Anderson from the Norse means son of man. So Mr. Anderson is literally the Mr. Son of Man, and Neo is the new man. He's never called Anderson. That's a sort of dead name that he never is called after he becomes, I guess, the One. And of course, Neo is an anagram of the One, right? One is new, the new thing. So all things will centripetally go back to the One. And from the one will come the two, come the four, come the eight, so on and so forth, right? The Lichtenberg pattern of growth. That which is born, lives, it dies, burns up, it returns and gives birth to new, it's subsumed by the earth and gives birth to new expressions of life. So it's that notion that was really encoded in his name and all of that. But he is looking at the Scarlet Woman. He's looking at Isis, trying to unveil her, but he cannot unveil her until he comes to that understanding that he's in a simulation, or, of course, like what we're saying, a dream. And who tells him that? Who tells him that anyone could be an agent? Morpheus, the Greek god of dreams. And the morph is, of course, we still have it today, the metamorphosis, the transformation. All of that is linked into this idea of morph, which is, again, like Maya, probably comes from the same root, I can imagine, which is, it's illusory, it's fluid, it's mercurial, right? It's both metallic, it's rigid, but it's fluid as well. And the only time I believe it ever becomes hardened or rigid is when it's in, I think it's just below freezing. So the freezing temperature of water. And of course, in room temperature, it becomes warm again. So it's this notion that we exist in Hades, which is the cold realm, Niflheim, hell with one L, the Norse sort of afterlife or underworld of the cold. The Kur is another one. The Sumerians and Akkadians have other names for this place. Again, it's a chasmic cavern. It's cold. It's damp. It's not a. It's a place where the dead go and they sort of shuffle around like clip otter husks. You could say a lot of people today are similar in that regard, right?
Well, but then, in a way, it almost sounds like we trapped ourselves instead of there being like the 64. These giants have been fractalized into us. How much of that is us? How much of us is them?
Well, when does the creation, which, of course, if a creator, or let's take a painter, for example, when he paints this glorious painting, he's got all the subjects and that, ultimately, he views the painting as just one entire thing. He may, he views it holistically, but he may view the subjects in their sort of individual state. But ultimately, the individual aspects of that subject are a mere illusion. It's a greater sort of part of the illusion of the painting, because ultimately all of it is just one hue that he's just he's sort of shaded and used the paintbrush to divide those hues and shadows into what we perceive as beings of perception, because all perception is based on the delineation of form, as separate individual beings, but they're not necessarily in their true essence separate. It's like what Carl Jung stated: if you take a tree and us, ultimately, fundamentally, in the essence of the cosmos, we are all one and the same. And I don't mean that in a sort of a a hippy dippy way. I mean it in a more cosmic, or you could say scientific way, right? So fundamentally, it's all leading back to that same idea that we're in a dream. Of course, you've got to be aware who you talk to as well about this stuff, because the Gnostics had the idea of the hylics, the wooden-headed ones, the ones who are in the hylis, the matter, the world of matter, purely of matter. Again, they're like the NPC projections of the unconscious in Inception. They protect the dreamer by killing the foreign element within the dream that tries to awaken the dreamer. So this is why you've got to watch who you say these things to, because they will become, some even become violent. They'll become vehemently opposed to you.
Let's get back to then what Franklin was saying, because then how, Franklin, how would you see this with what you were saying with this reflection of the 64 giants into fractals that were imprisoned themselves by accident by imprisoning us? Like, how would this relate? You're muted.
You're muted.
What do you mean specifically? Relate to what specifically? Because there was quite a lot just said. There's a lot to unpack. You're talking about the hierarchical system.
Basically, yeah, with like these entities that we would then be interacting with, either in the material or the etheric or the astral, from what happened here.
I believe they used the etheric to embed themselves within our psyches. And they embedded themselves within our psyches through the 7 sins. Greed, avarice, wrath. All of these beings went in league with these creatures. And so these beings were born. So maybe they created these beings that live through us, that gives them a chariot way to pull us, to control us, our greed, so through all of these emotional complexes that prevent us from reaching into the astral, keep us trapped in the etheric form, they have access to us and sustenance from us.
And if they projected themselves into these like 7 deadly sins that are then part of the psyche of man, and then to the most negative portions of it, and then these people who then reflect these parts of the psyche, they die and become disembodied, then they're in kind of their world now as well. They're in these other entities' world, where not only what they did has affected where their spirit is, like kind of the state of it, also they have this attachment that then seems to be working on people in the material plane. Because it seems like these disembodied entities are what the societies that seem to run everything always have reached out to. It's like always like a channeling, always a seance.
Maybe this has got a lot to do with the re-engineering of our genetics and using the tetragrammaton and the knowledge to re-engineer our genetics in order for them to be able to have this fluidity and this connection with us. And then I see genetics as being the substrate of reality through which the consciousness field is able to manifest the etheric field, right? So this consciousness spiritual field manifests itself into a smaller astral field, and the smaller astral field has to compress itself into a smaller etheric field, and that smaller etheric field has to compress itself into a very small, tight little physical field. And so these dimensional shifts of compression has sort of got us trapped in this very small portion of reality, where reality is much bigger and the etheric field is much bigger than what the physical field is. This is why there's this time dilation. And when we go from the etheric field to the astral field, which is where our dreams are like created in the astral field. Like you can be dreaming. So there's all this lucid dreaming, and everybody wants to get control of their dreams. But if you actually in a lucid dream decide, I'm dreaming, I'm not going to control whether I can fly or not. I'm not going to control what I can do. I'm going to control the substrate of the entire dream. I'm going to be God of this dream. And if you choose that, then you sort of expand yourself out around the whole dream. and the dream unravels. And when it unravels, you're floating in this space. You're like, okay, this is fluid space where I'm floating in. Like, where am I now? And so it gives us this idea that the dream is sort of constructed in the astral field when we're focusing towards the etheric forms, and the forms of the etheric get imprinted through our emotions, through these emotional context into our consciousness, that we experience this reality. I think these beings are trapped in one of those realities. They're trapped in a dream reality, and the only way they can stay alive is through us,
Yes.
the Sandman, right?
It's interesting too how like we have like this idea of the disembodied entities again. With it matches with the obsession with like this necromancy, this like controlled dead matter. We are a society that wants to reanimate the dead. Basically,
that's the metaverse.
Yeah.
The dead verse. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's the. Oh, sorry, Chris. Please finish.
Is it to bring in these entities, basically?
Well, the potter will always create the vessels that are required to hold the sort of liquid that cascades into it. So perhaps this is what I've stated, that they're digitally terraforming the planet. Now, even the idea of the digi or digit is this idea of the sand, right? It's the sand which was once, a full rock, a full stone, which of course has symbolic connotations to masonry itself, a body. But now it's all broken down into these, you could say, atomized grains, to be passed through this sort of bottleneck, if you will, of the hourglass, right? The midpoint. So basically what you're seeing with virtual reality is they understand the dreamscape of the world, and they're perhaps attempting to create, in a sort of concentric manner, like a Matryoshka doll, another dream. Everything's artificial intelligence. Everything, of course, is smart, which, by the way, I believe has connotations in Sanskrit as well. So there's probably something deeper with that too. It's all of it is really recreating a dream within a dream, because it's like what Mark Twain stated. All that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream, and then you have Pindar mentioning man is but a dream of a shadow, and then you have that same idea, that meme, if you will, that was parroted in Ecclesiastes of the New Testament, where it states, man is but a shadow of a shadow. So you have these same ideas. And of course, this links with the camera obscura notion. This, you could take something and then project it, but its projection will be inverted. This is why perhaps we see the world as an inverse. Our mind is that thing which has to flip it the right way around. Even the rainbow as well. The red is at the bottom, the purple at the top, and of course in the chakra system, it's usually the other way around. And you saw the same thing with the Zoroastrians and the Hindus, where the Ahuras or the Asuras and the Devas were all flipped upside down. I believe Surya as well, where Asura comes from. Asura is the sun, is it not? So Asura would be the negative with the A prefix. So you have this idea of the sort of black sun. Those who are of the sun, those who are of the black sun or the malefic sun, or even perhaps even the esoteric or hidden sun. So this notion of Saturn as well, right? But Saturn isn't necessarily malefic or evil on its own. I think whoever is in charge of us, whoever they are answering to, both in this realm and in realms unseen, it's given them a very distorted picture of things. But I think you're onto something as well. They need sustenance from somewhere to allow them to exist within this world until their great work is finished. This sort of interdimensional or extra dimensional entities, these sort of immaterial things, or they appear immaterial to us. the principalities and powers that rule us, as the Bible states. So yeah, I think there is something to that, absolutely. I mean, it doesn't make sense when you look at history. How could you have, well, for example, the mercantilist class of who deal in fiat currency? I can't imagine through, I don't know what, 4,000 years or 3,000 years, however long this sort of Ponzi scheme has been going on, how have they not been overthrown?
Yeah.
It baffles the mind. How has an individual who was indebted to them not managed to gain enough gumption, galvanized his spirit enough to overthrow them? It just doesn't make sense. Unless, of course, there's something else at play here, and what we're in is a very carefully and scientifically managed system, a field of crops by which the satyr, there's another idea as well, satyr repotenet opera rotas, or the reverse, which it probably came from Kabbalah.
And that's what I was just thinking of that, because when you said the pieces like the sand, like grains of sand, I was thinking it's like they want to take us and put us in like the hyperbole permanently instead of the torus. It's like they want to put us in the hyperbole, this like, which is basically the void. They want us in the void permanently, and it's like that's the reverse of the torus. Just like, and then you have the tenet, which is, I mean, the whole story of the movie, another film by Nolan, who same person who did Inception, with the inversion of time.
Yeah.
And I mean, you'll notice these people, they always say the ancient future, what is it? It's like the ancient future or the future's past. They always use one version of this when talking about the future.
Yeah.
Almost like we're going in like a loop.
Yes, yeah, it's an archaeo-futurist thing, and
Crowley especially talked about this a lot.
Oh yeah. I mean, what you've got to realize is these people. Well, look at Kissinger, for example. I mean, these people, to their dying day, until they take their last breath upon this planet, they have this fire, this zealous fire, where they just don't let up. Totally relentless in the way that they want to bring about this notion. And it's some of the most learned men in society have this very strong religious, well, it is, yeah, it's a dogmatic religious idea that they can bring to bear on the world, impose upon the world what they call a utopia, but for the rest of us will be a complete and utter dystopia. They want to impose this sort of magnum opus, this great work. It really, is complete inversion. It's summed up by the idea of ordo ab chaos. I mean, that's ultimately, if you were to put it into the three words, that's pretty much it. Order out of chaos, ordo ab chaos in the Latin, of course. And they seek to use destruction as a way to establish a world that is, well, a sort of phoenix from the ashes. So
that's an interesting point that you make about, and I think it's going to tie into the abduction story as well. Now, I believe that the Frankists that were the followers of
Sabbatean.
That guy's name.
Sabbatean.
The Frankists.
Sabbatai Zvi.
Yeah, Sabbatai.
Exactly, Sabbatai. With this guy's twisted philosophy that I'm sure that those of you that are watching this probably know. If you don't, go and look up the Frankists, go and look up the Sabbatai, so-called prophet that was like banned from all synagogues for a really interestingly good reason, because of his ideas being too way out there. And that became the Zionist movement, which I believe is what we saw in the USSR, the infiltration of the state through that what do they call it, the Bolshevik revolution. So, but they also had this takeover in Western states. And the whole idea behind Frankism from the Sabbatean philosophy was that they need to infiltrate all religions, every organization, government, governance, police, education, and the Masonic order. I think that they went into the Masonic order. I think that they infiltrated it. I think they infiltrated the Golden Dawn movement. I think that originally the Great Work was something that related to bringing these three circles
Yes, I agree.
into one circle,
Exactly. But they
that you were living in all
all
three worlds at once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In balanced and harmony, and that the Trimurti of that thing on top of Pashupati's head, representing the bringing together of those two opposing potentials, which really
Exactly.
means having control of your desires, those seven beastly little buggers that are in our heads that keep us trapped in this world of money and form and all the things that are unhealthy for us, be they drug addictions or doing bad things or dishonesty, whatever. It always comes back to those desires, and also they're the source that can empower the world to take us up the tree or to bring us down into this depth of the underworld and understand. And I think what you said earlier, Chris, is like really poignant about how our way back to the divine is actually through these creatures, and that they have embedded themselves within us in some way. So we have to overcome them. Literally, we have to overcome these base emotions, and we need to sort of the alchemical fire. We need to alchemically purify our systems so that those emotions become our slave. And when those emotions are our slaves, they can't control us. Then we're free of them. Then we're able to transcend and move into the more holistic state of consciousness, which involves all three of these spheres being in one, which I believe was the Great Work, but I think that they hijacked the Great Work sometime in the 1800s or the 1700s. And now the Great Work has become something very different, like you're talking about, all of these crazy Kissinger types that are out there to basically turn us into, well, they don't want our bodies to be what our bodies are anymore. They want to give us new bodies. They want to change our physical form and our life and our system. Everything about it has to be according to their will. And so that etheric field is all about the will. It's all about conforming everything to a will, which is what magic has become. Do as thou will, which is really certain groups of magicians. I believe that in the old times, it wasn't do as thou will. I think the magical formula was quite different. I think high magic was what people were practicing as opposed to natural magic. And so they were really about transforming themselves to become perfectly in tune with the divine forces so that they can transcend. But at some point, there were certain administrators put on earth to keep the control, so that high magic then revolved meeting up with these beings and getting told what to do, basically getting told what you need to, where's your next step. These enlightened beings will give us what we need to know instead of us being able to actually ourselves become enlightened. That gnosis is lost in the tubes of the drainage of the consciousness, and now we are sort of back to this hierarchical state, which is really, I think, the currency of the eighth sphere. And so without getting too lost in that, bringing the conversation back to what you were talking about now, I think, as we are looking at this world around us and how they have sort of transformed our ideologies and our philosophies and our very connection to the spirit, this AI situation is a way for them to have greater control of our physical world without needing intermediaries. Until now, they needed humans as intermediaries. But it's like we were having this conversation with PK, and PK was saying, well, they're not really that clued up. They're not really that jacked up. They're not really that in control of the world. That just seems to be, they that we're talking about, the people, the puppets aren't. But puppets are only puppets. Who's controlling the puppets is on a whole nother level. Now, who's controlling the puppets has realized they don't need those puppets if they have an AI system that's literally inserted into our physical bodies, right?
Yes.
That can literally interface with our neural pathways and actually
The-
change the
the
way we
one
think
ring-
so that they can ensure.
The one
Yeah.
ring to rule them all. Yes.
Scary.
There also be some sort of because you were saying this, like, how was I tricked coming back here? Like, as much as you might have to reintegrate these things, it seems like even if you do, there's still something preventing us from leaving.
See, I don't necessarily think. Of course, perhaps there is an exit to this place, right?
And I don't
I
mean
think-
leaving just now. I just mean after we, like, naturally leaving after when it's our time, we die, and then leaving from instead of reincarnating
Yes.
over and over again.
Instead of
That's what I
getting
mean.
put back into that sort of cosmic soup again in the
Yeah.
cycle. See, I think the reason that we're here is almost we act as talismans ourselves. That we are here to try and maintain balance. The reason we take on these this certain archetype of, well, at this point, the rebel against the evil. So we are the good and they are the evil, again, to be very simplistic about it. Then, we seek order and they seek disorder or something along those lines. Then it's to try and maintain balance. It's like like applying a brake to an accelerating car. It's to try and slow it down.
Yeah,
Um,
and I know what you're saying. We're basically trying to. I mean, it's either balance or we're trying to totally. It's like all for one and one for all. If everyone doesn't come, we don't leave.
Yes, but if we're permutations of the dreamer, then
we would just want balance.
yes, the dreamer wants balance because remember, the dream wants to maintain itself.
Mhm.
Anything that awakens the dreamer, that if you bring him too much into the nightmare or the utopia or the paradise, then of course, like Dante's Inferno, right? You want to keep him in the purgatory, in this sort of
Yeah.
balanced state.
Because if
of
we
senses.
let it get too bad,
Or
the
too
dream
good,
the dream or too good, the dream collapses.
yeah,
and
because you can't suspend your
existence,
disbelief.
and that means existence collapses.
Exactly. So, I mean, that's probably the reason that you have this autonomous or involuntary cropping up of for like the likes of us, right? I mean, I didn't choose
I
this.
almost think it might be voluntary. We might choose it once we see how bad it is and then see its
Yes.
state of it.
We could, yeah. I mean, I have to be honest. I think it's involuntary. I mean, I'm. If you had said to me 12 years ago when I was a diehard atheist, I'd be on a show talking about mythology and religions and the occult and cosmogony and all of this, I'd have laughed right in your face. But there's like a quickening going on. We are not really in control of our lives. We, again, like the dream gives us the illusion that we're in control of our avatar, but we're not really. Fundamentally, the dream, like the river of the Eridanus and Orion upon it, the headless dreamer, the headless god, we can't really control it. Until we can control it, then we, of course, are sort of under the cosh of it. So we meander with the river, with the current of the river, like we meander with the current of the dream. While we're in there, we're sort of autonomous.
Well, I wonder if you would think this, like, so say we find ourselves after a lifetime looking back and really seeing that there's such a disbalance that if you don't return, everything ceases to exist anyways. It's not really a choice then.
Yes.
Then you're kind of forced into going back, even if you don't want to, but you are still choosing to because you could leave, but that leaving would essentially mean you're blotting yourself. Basically, I guess, or you would at least be raising the chance that you're blotting yourself out of existence permanently by waking the dreamer. Yeah.
Yeah. If you awaken from the dream, you stop existing in this sort of realm, in all of its concentric multiplications, right? So you go beyond that. What is beyond that? Who knows? maybe it's another wheel within a wheel within a wheel. I don't know, but yeah, technically, if you went beyond this point, if you did awaken from the dream, then of course existence would cease, because existence is contingent upon the dream and the dreamer's immersion within that. Another thing is,
and it's not even you awakening; it's the source consciousness of this dream awakening that you're just a piece of.
yes, exactly, yeah. So it after so many cycles, eventually all of it gets purified, if you will, and will re-emerge back into that. It will centripetally go back to the source, if you will, the 0 point of order. So,
which I think all of us hope would be a sort of instead of merging into like a one, it would kind of give us all our own individuality in that sense. But I don't know if that's the way it's supposed to, if that's how it's gonna work or not. I mean, it seems like that would be the ideal situation.
I think
yeah,
jump in, man.
No, please finish your thought, brother.
No, I was just going to mention as well that when we look at this, and sorry, I'm going on a bit of a tangent here, but just really quickly, when we look at these ideas of sort of the I guess you would call them cosmic parasites, right? Those who gain sustenance from us, the dreamer, then of course the dreamer himself, though he's in a reverie whilst he's in the dream, he's denied the truth. He's denied the truth of everything, which is what we see, of course, in the Hellenic idea of drinking from the river of forgetfulness. But I think it's called the Aletheia. So those who are spectating the dreamer, who may be even crafting the dream, it's those unseen forces that, of course, gain some form of whatever energetic sustenance from the dreamer being immersed within the dream. So even with the dreamer awakening from that, he can't really be fully aware of who is gaining sustenance from his dreaming unless he is actually in the dream himself. You have to, it's like Alice going down the rabbit hole.
That then adds a whole matrix within a matrix within a matrix.
Exactly. Well, it's the reason of why we descended spiritually. We involuted ourselves to thus gain conscious evolution, because conscious evolution is the truth of this all. It's the truth of the cycles. It's basically what we're discussing here is systems theory, not just systems theory from our terrestrial point of view, but everything. And it's the reason it must be true is because it's a fabric. We're literally weaving a fabric here of interrelations, interdependencies, cosmically, terrestrially. So all of it must harken back to a singular source of truth, a divine science of the nature of the world. So basically, it feeds into everything. I mean, this is why I began looking at probably 5 years ago. I mean, I've looked at all of these topics years and years and years back, but I didn't really quite understand it back then. Last 5 years since the event in 2020, I started writing a book on military history, and then before you know it, I'm here, because all of it's all interdependent. All of it's a multidiscipline. This is why they really love to have specialization, because if you're a specialist, an expert, if you will, you don't have a holistic view. You're not a Renaissance man. You don't have a holistic view of life. Therefore, you can never escape. It's like what Steiner stated regarding the mathematics and the arithmetic, right? You view the sum instead of the whole, right? You become fixated on the parts. Sorry, please.
Yeah, no, I'm totally sort of keeping track of what you're saying, and sort of the dreamer and reality. I think that's what this image represents. You know, the Sushumna, the Ida, and the Pingala as these three fundamental worlds, three fundamental principles, bound in an interplay and a dance. And that interplay and the dance is what we call this reality. And you can't take them apart, because this reality is the dance of the Sephirot, the containers, the shape, the form, with the energy of the astral to fill those containers with energy, and then the Shashumna to direct the course of this process of the energy filling the containers, of the chakras resonating with the Sephirot. And I just want to say, for people that are working with chakras or people who are working with Sephirot, there's no one that's better than the other. What you do to the one side happens to the other side in terms of mathematical equation. It sort of holds true. So if you work on your Sephirot, your chakras are being affected. If you work on your chakras, your Sephirot are being activated. They work in conduit and in synchronicity. What you do to your emotional field will translate to the way that your mind works and thinks. How you shift the way that your mind thinks will translate to the way that you feel. They are like this, like that picture, bound around each other and an extension of each other through this reality. They are bound in the Shashumna. And so these three principles, the Trimurti, this is going back to those three faces that we were talking about earlier, right? The three faces, the three-headed deity, if you will, representing the Trinity and the triple goddess. Let's not forget the triple goddess, an older form of what we know as the Trinity, in my opinion. I'm not sure about that, but that's what I believe. Though, regardless, the chicken or the egg, which came first, I don't think it matters. I think they're all part of the same thing, just perceived and experienced in a different way. And I get this strong sense that there's this correlation here with dream time. They don't want us to realize that we're in a dream. I think that's how they can control us. When we start realizing that this is all just a dream, then we can't be afraid. Because how can you be afraid of a dream? It's not real. And so fear is one of the abduction tools. So there are beings that abduct people. So you can be abducted through fear. The lizards, in my experience, work with fear. They use fear. And they wear these suits. They're like armor. And then they are very archonic in the way that they look. In fact, they look like the archons, but like in physical form of the archons. And the suits that they wear, I believe, gives them the ability to jump through the ethers and interact with us. So those guys will literally take us out of our body using fear. Very often sexual stuff happening that's not pleasant on the physical world can trigger this, or happening in the dream time. And so they'll be sexualizing their victims in a not so pleasant way in order to generate the fear necessary to disconnect them from the physical, so that they can take them on a journey in order to condition them elsewhere. It's about conditioning. Then there's the other beings that use the higher aspects of the emotional field. So those of us that seek enlightenment and seek to be free and pure and spiritual, those will get ascended masters coming to us, or we'll get Jesus, or we'll get the Buddha, or we'll get some angel or whatever that will be giving us this incredible wisdom. And we know so many people have written books about this, and they believe they found the answers and whatnot and whatever. And so that's the other abduction tool that I'm aware of, that I have experience with, which I believe is the more insidious form. That's not the lizard beings, that's the insectoid beings, from my experience, that use that technology. And they don't use suits. They literally bring their crafts over the earth. I don't believe they come from somewhere else. I think they come from inside the earth, but I don't know this for a fact. But I think these ant creatures come from inside the earth, but they have technology. They have these like masks that they put over their face.
Well, this gets into
And
the
they-
idea of the more physical aspect of all of this, and if it's like a technology that's being used by controllers of like social engineers that are actually human, or at least as human as they can be.
Or even chimeric as well. They
Yeah.
could be that. I mean,
That have
it's
started dabbling maybe even with some of this technology themselves, or with their children, or with other entities that or other animals, or God knows what. I mean,
Yeah.
there's something weird. I don't know if you guys have seen that shark, the zombie shark that exists in the heavy water, in the deeper aspects of the ocean. To me, that almost looks like a chimera. I mean, I think it's called chimera, a chimera shark, which is really fucking weird because it looks like a zombie shark, like that was stitched together, and its eyes look like cameras. And when I look at it, I'm like, is this something that some sort of group of eugenicist type scientists just threw together while they were like in the pressures of the underwater, like an underwater lab that they have somewhere, and it somehow made this entity, and that's why it looks the way it does, why they even called it a chimera.
It's interesting as well because you have a lot of these sort of, like what you're saying, very deep sea creatures. The deeper obviously they reside within the sea, the more stranger their anatomy is. They of course they even look horrific in most cases. In most cases, they're horrific.
The weird thing is, gigantism is attached to the deeper you get bigger.
Yeah.
For some reason, and I have no idea. There's something to do with the pressure or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very strange. You get other very, for example, bioluminescence is very prevalent in those regions too. You have the I forget what the fish's name is now, with the lamp in front of it. Oh God, I'm gonna have to look up the fish's name. That's gonna bug me now. Where it has this bioluminescent lamp or vestigial protrusion from its head, which it uses to hunt. Yes, I forget what they call it now, but it looks horrific, absolutely horrific. Looks horrific, absolutely, and yeah,
My son digs that
does
one.
make me- Oh,
Yeah. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, Franklin, but just when you were talking about the kind of entities from here that could be like the ant type of entity or something like that, just made me think of, is this part of what these entities are? Because I mean, there comes a point too where so many people, I mean, millions have said they've had some sort of weird abduction experience. I mean, you can't say all of them are insane, and it's never good. It's never good.
There's another potential as well that, see, it's interesting because when they started work on these remote technologies to control individuals' minds, you would call them the voice of God technologies and other things, again, to remotely interfere
100%.
with almost the toroid field of oneself, or the dynamic electromagnetic field that we all have and possess. Of course, this is what most of their psychotronic technology is based upon too, right? That they were looking into cybernetics, the human use of human beings. He discussed an artificial sense organ. Of course, we have that right now with the phones, but he wants that implanted. All the way back in 2001, they were talking about in Loyola, of course, Ignatius Loyola, the Kabbalistic founder of the Jesuit order. Loyola University in 2001 held a conference there, and I think it was either Kurzweil or another individual that's part of that group, and he was mentioning that we already have the technology now to have brain-computer interfaces. We're just waiting for the right moment, because we don't think, we're waiting for the right event, because we don't think people will accept it en masse. So it's this same notion. But he mentioned too that they could indirectly, and sort of, it's the same idea as the active denial system. It's just less sort of violently interfering with the biological system. It interferes with the mind. So, you know, they were saying in them
basically you could stimulate an abduction experience without actually
exactly
having an
without
abduction.
actually having it. Yes, it could. You could hear voices. You could hear things in your mind. You could actually see things which were not there.
And I
It's
would think this is
extraordinary.
probably what a majority of them are.
Yes. But the thing is as well, getting back, see this idea of even the lizards and the insects, that whenever you see these individuals talk about how they want humanity to be, that anglerfish, yeah, thank you. Sorry, somebody just posted it in the comments, the fish, yeah, thanks. So the way they want human beings to be is social. They say we're only partially social. They want us to be like a termitory or an ant mound or a beehive, which in that sense we're only partially social because we give up some sort of free will to the group for a mutual benefit. The ant, the termite, the bee, the drone does not do that. What it does is it gives its entire life over without question to almost social, in a socialistic sense, right? Over to the hive, and this is how they want humanity to be. So they want, again, Nietzsche's last man, the multiplication of 0 by 0, more insect than man. So they want, they want, in that sense, to create a allegorical chimera through technology. And then there's another thing too that, I mean, Yuval Noah Harari states that the only way to deal with the quote useless class from the coming AI revolution is by a combination of drugs and video games or virtual reality. Bertrand Russell stated the same thing in his book Impact on the Impact of Science on Society, 1956, where he discusses through a steady inclusion or implementation of a strict diet of injections and indoctrination, we can create a more desirable character that will actually be taught and will believe on a moment's notice by our very diktat that snow is black. So how can you bring that in without failure unless you have control over the torus field, the natural field, the natural inclinations and mental landscape of man on demand by some sort of grid-like control system that is remote, it's subtle, it's unseen, and it's something that's carried through, like what you were saying, the ether, the air. Remember, Satan is the prince of the air. Enlil, very similar, of course. Well, he's likened to Jupiter, but he's very similar to a Saturnian archetype, which was his son, Nurta. Again, a controlling aspect, Ahriman, this notion. So it's all really encompassed in this notion of the air, of the notion of the electromagnetic wave, controlling the wave, oscillating the wave, modulating
the air
the
is
wave.
the field.
Exactly.
It's just a new field. It's not on the ground anymore now.
Exactly. And basically, the physical aspect of this agenda, this is what it gets down to. This is the science of it. But the science that we're discussing here links back to the occult. It all comes from the occult. I mean, it's of course, the occult take these technical documents and they put it in symbolism. Because again, if they destroyed themselves in this Atlantean or precursor civilization, Thoth would have taken these, or whoever it would have been, would have taken these technical drawings to these barbarians, as they're called in Egypt at the time, this black land, but due to the fertile soil. He would have taken these barbarians, these technical drawings. They wouldn't have understood what they were after a few generations, so they would have philosophized on them. But they would have had an inkling of, well, this is what the precursor civilization was doing. And we are the elect because we understand this, and the laity do not. But we control the laity through this sort of misrepresentation, this misleading of the symbolism. So you're basically seeing in the symbolism technical projections of this deep sacred science that can be used for good, but it can also, of course, be used for very nefarious things as well.
I think the sacred knowledge that we've got is essentially physics and science. I don't think they're separate. I think once you understand the laws of consciousness, you understand the laws of physics, the matter, because matter, I am very much from a pan, pan is really where we are at, but this is really a reflection of consciousness. So to me, I can't really draw a distinction between consciousness and matter, because I literally see reality as being a dream. And
the only problem with the people who, so it's not everyone who thinks this way is problematic, but it becomes problematic when the people who think that way then totally think, well, if I understand physics, then I understand consciousness, so then that's all I need to understand. Then F natural law, I don't need to understand that. So it's like the moral aspect of everything then that seems to be what happens with these like elite families who have this technology and hold on to it. The moral aspect of it doesn't seem to matter to them.
I think they do have a morality. I think their morality is just upside down.
No.
They've got their own form of morality, which is like more of all, please. It's greed-based, right? I want more of all, more all, not morale. So, and they get their morale from getting more. So the etheric field is all about like form and what you've got, substance.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about morality, we're talking about qualities. We're talking about the astral, talking about the emotional connection between human beings, love and compassion. And I see these all being astral reflections of the divine, which is essentially that which is the balance of the etheric and the astral. And then that is sort of doing this. And so here's vibration. Without the astral and the etheric doing this, there wouldn't be vibration. And if there wasn't vibration, then there could be no drawing forth from the first principle to allow the other 6 principles to come into being in order to manifest the 2 polarities of the 2 principles that act as the go-between, which is cause and effect and polarity.
That also might be why they keep us around, why they keep regular people around, because of that polarity. They might have lost the ability to sort of connect to that those astral emotions and everything like that. So they need those who can.
Yes.
I mean, it's kind of interesting how there's a lot of sci-fi films where you see them studying the dreams of multiple large groups of individuals. I know they had this in the OA where they were studying dreams. I mean, they study dreams in real life, like group dreams, and like it's almost like they don't have dreams sometimes. Like there is no ability to do that.
Here's an interesting thing, right? So, like most of my life, I practiced meditation on like a full-time basis. So while other people were doing like the 9 to 5, I was doing the 9 to 5 of meditation. And what I noticed was the more I meditate and the deeper I go into a state of unified consciousness, where all aspects of the mind and the brain are working together like a team, tag team, and focused into the center of the head. So all the conduit of thought and emotion and everything is channeling in that same, which then becomes like a direct connection and extension of the heart, which is then like directly bound in our pelvic cup.
Mm-hmm.
And what I noticed was that the more I get into deep meditation, the less I dream, because I'm like consciously processing that information during the day. So I would put my head down and I would just close my eyes and open my eyes, and 6 hours has passed. But I'm like supercharged, awake, energized. And it's like last night I didn't sleep very much. I only slept like 4 hours, right?
Same.
But it doesn't bother me. I've noticed that like a lot of people, they can't operate on less sleep. And I think that the reason people can't operate on less sleep is because they have too much unconscious, unprocessed information that's taking up neural stuff. And it has to do with the emotions, has to do with like the stuff we repress, has to do with shadow self.
That's what like these people like have. It's not that they can't dream; it's that they don't. Their emotions are just gone. No need for them. It's like they threw them out, cut it off.
Yeah, so it like it limits us.
They're all psychopaths. I mean, the people who control us are psychopaths. So it's like they don't feel much.
And that's really interesting because there are these like big creatures that like some children might experience. And when I was young, I never understood what these were. They like big kind of black cats that aren't black cats. I just knew they weren't what they seemed. And they were looking for me. They were sniffing the air. My son calls him Spitty. He calls him Spitty. And they're like these shadowy creatures that come trying to sniff you, trying to find you. And I had like this little dancing guy that used to come and dance and like do his thing, you know, do somersaults. And he wore this funky hat and this funky, like bright colors. And he was so cool. And he used to protect me. And so when I didn't know like that he was a leprechaun. Yeah, I didn't know about these things. I just, like I told my dad was like, oh my gosh, this is a bit freaky. I was like, no, Dad, these big creatures trying to find me and they're sniffing. Look, and my son calls them Spitties. Lately, he's been seeing them again. Now he's been talking about the clown face, the killer clown face. I'm like, that's definitely part of this agenda of mind control that's been hidden into the media, subvertively hidden in, so that certain of these beings can use that archetype in order to engage with us on a fear-based platform, which is a little bit freaky. So he's noticed this killer clown faces and these things like that come at him at night and stuff, and which is interesting, you know. And I think that what it comes down to is that because our minds are always so busy, we have to compartmentalize. And the more that we compartmentalize, the more we have to push away our unconscious feelings. And so the shadow becomes highly empowered and highly energized. And that means that our neural pathways are like closed. So we have less potential to experience reality. So our senses become numb. Our sense of sound, where we can hear the ethers, where we can see the ethers, we can look at like a living thing and we can see the little dots and we can focus on it and we can see the energy and we can look at that and we can see, oh, there's bands of color in there, and we can sort of understand there's funny little currents around things, and each plant's got its own little currents and its own little dance of energy, and there's these different colors, frequencies. If you look inside those currents, you see there's colors. And so we have this natural ability through our physical organs to see the ethers and to see right through the ethers into the astral, to see the etheric shapes and forms that the energy takes, like little grids, and then to look in through that and actually see the qualities behind those shapes and grids of the actual energy that's filling that little energetic grid around whatever it is you're looking at. And we can't do this because our neural pathways are too busy on the back end. And so we need to integrate all of our neural pathways. And this is what we call the Ajna chakra. So the Ajna chakra is when you centralize your focus in your head and you don't allow this part of the brain to do that and this part of the brain to do that and this part of the brain. No, we're going to just sit here and we're going to focus here. So everything's looking in towards the center. And we were talking about the center of the cube and that origin. And I think this is how we transcend this physical form. And so these beings, rather than allowing us to look into the center and look inside our eyes, and you guys mentioned it earlier as well, you know, about the neon fish. I believe, Silas, you were talking about it. Without getting too lost in the conversation of it, in the source, as it were, there are cells in the pineal and cells in the optic region of the eye. These cells are triangular. They have a piezoelectric type of a quality. They are entangled because of vibrational resonance between the two. So there's a quantum entanglement. The light stimulating our eyes generates inside of our pineal gland a reaction. And this is why melanin and other hormones are generated, melatonin, so that our sleep cycles and our awake cycles are controlled by how conscious we are, based upon this, which stimulates serotonin, dopamine, and everything else to keep the body moving and energized so that you can do things, and to keep your emotional energies part of this consciousness field. You obviously need the serotonin, very important. So this basic, these cells are very similar to the cells on these fish that generate these lights under the sea. And when we stimulate our eyes with light, then we stimulate our internal cells, which actually generates light inside our eyes. So when we're in deep state of meditation and people are seeing light and color, they don't realize they are actually seeing light and color. They're not imagining it. Enlightenment isn't some metaphor that's out there in woo-woo land. It's literally that the pineal gland is generating light that goes right through the claustrum and actually contacts the pituitary gland directly, which is attached to the hypothalamus.
Do you know?
So there's light running through the head, and this stimulates the fluids. Yeah.
Do you know what's really interesting about that as well? You see that same thing crop up in the phenomenon of the prisoner's cinema, where prisoners that were in oblates or really dark dungeons, they would begin to see that. Their mind, after a while, would begin to actually create geometric shapes and light, like what you're saying, because it's there. Like it's everywhere. It's even perhaps coming out internally from us. It's something that just it's there. It's present. Yeah.
It's interesting too. I remember earlier, Silas, you mentioned something based on what Franklin was talking about regarding the color blue, and how there was like an aversion to blue. I think you were saying that in some of the more occult circles, and well, the blue light basically from our computers is actually really harmful to our cells, and the red light from the sun is apparently like what keeps our mitochondria healthy. So there's that aspect to why they might be having an aversion to blue as well, because they know from the occult teachings that they've learned what light is healthy to intake into the eyes and what is unhealthy.
I think that blue light isn't necessarily unhealthy. I just think
the type
that
of blue light. Yeah, it's like the frequency of it and the amount of it that we're getting.
The amount of it. Yeah. I think it's like that. It's like your body needs a certain amount of arsenic to be healthy.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
But you OD that arsenic and it becomes toxic. And I think the same could be said, like if there was too much red light, the reaction would be cancer. Like, okay, let's say you're growing a can of bus, right? Let's say you got a special tent with special lights and you want to increase your yield of your can of cannabis. Then what you do is you increase the far red light and you reduce the blue light. Increasing the far red lights, you see, far red light causes cells to be bigger, causes them to become bigger. And the blue light actually causes cells to become smaller with a thicker wall, which is more protected. So blue light causes things to crystallize, red light causes things to expand. So too much red light would cause tissue to become bigger, cells to become bigger. So if we were giants in the past, it was because there was more red light, far red in the frequency of the sun. And the far red in the frequency of the sun would have made each cell a little bit bigger. And each cell being a little bit bigger would make up a percentage, 10%, 15, 20% more substance, which would make you 15, 20% bigger.
Well, it's like the vapor canopy type of idea too, right? When, I mean, I think people like Jack Cruz, who, I mean, I don't know if he's correct about everything, but he's like, he basically says we're so overloaded with blue light from the LEDs now that like as much sun as you can get, man, as much red light as you can get, you won't get cancer. Like he's pretty convinced of that. I've even heard him say if you have skin cancer, it's just more sun, which I have no idea if that's true or not. So I'm not giving medical advice to anyone, but
I think he's right. Like more sun is actually the secret to good health, and I agree. Like up to a point, you know. Obviously, once again, you can OD on too much of a good thing. It's like saying more water will detoxify your body. Yeah, but if you drink too much water,
obviously
it will actually flush all the nutrients from your system.
We've all had experience where we got burnt by the sun really bad, I'm sure, like where it was not a good thing.
But like I've been, as you can see, like myself a good tan going on here. Dun, dun, dun. I'm quite happy with my tan.
Well, the only time I've been burnt by the sun really bad was out here in California, where I think there's also like a lot of artificial light and horrible, like the atmosphere is horrible. So the sun I'm getting isn't the best either. And I wasn't out in the sun for a while before that. And then it was just like a whole day out in the sun. And I was also cloudy that day. So it was like, so my own
Do you wear
fault.
sunglasses?
Not really. Sometimes I do, but I try not to.
Because I believe, and I don't know this for a fact, but I believe that sunglasses tell the eyes one thing, and that tells the skin one thing. And you actually want the UV touching your eyes so that your eyes can tell your body, listen, kick out the defenses. The same like a cannabis plant, you know? Exactly. You put extra UV onto that plant, and it's going to actually produce THC to protect itself. And we've got similar chemical reactions in our skin that will actually bring out more of the vitamin D, which is actually going to create oils, which is actually going to protect us.
100%.
It's like everything in the world. It follows the sun. Even plants, they'll grow in the direction of the sun. It's quite interesting. And of course, this is why, just on a purely exoteric level, the sun was always the god. In large part, it still is. Of course, Christ is very much a symbol of the sun, amongst being a symbol of other things, right? In the more esoteric aspect, but exoterically, I mean, Christ is the sun. He's got a halo. He has either a halo above his head or behind his head. So it's always there, isn't it? Even the cross of the sun.
Well, even looking at that chakra system that Franklin just set up before, like the intertwining one. I mean, that's like Steiner, not that one, the other one of the person, where it had like I mean, that's like how Steiner has like his solar system model of like the planets following like the sun and this sort of corkscrewing.
Oh yeah, that's exactly that's the toroid. I mean, if you were to look at the toroidal moment when it's established, you have this ring of, I forget how many toruses it is now, but it looks like a zodiacal wheel, and you have this torus made up of a ring of toruses, and those toruses themselves are made up of rings of toruses that are vertically stacked, and then those vertically stacked toruses are made up of individually horizontally stacked toruses. So of course you get the crucifix idea too, right? And but ultimately that is infinitude, and it's the sort of the pervading structure of the cosmos. What you're seeing there, that's just looking at it from a sort of sectioned view. But if you were to look at it from, be it either, a sort of orthographic projection or whatever, you would see the cross. You would see the 8-rayed star, because that is the center of the torus. The cross itself is the sort of geometric shape that's formed by the sort of geomagnetism, the magnetic fields that's produced from that 0 point of the creation of the torus. It's similar to, of course, the tornado. The eye of the storm will always be peaceful, and from that peace emanates this, sort of calamity that all moves in one direction. It's it's pretty much that. I mean, everything in even our modern society, if everything is a shadow of a shadow, a dream of a dream, it's all Maya, it's a lila, a cosmic stage performance, then of course they're attempting to recreate that through programmatic code. So it's literally in the act of their transgressions, they acknowledge not just God, or whatever we want to call it, the prima causa, but they acknowledge the entire structure of the cosmos. They almost reveal it. It is the apocalypse, it is the era of revelation. This is why you have this sort of a Highlander-like quickening, you know?
Yeah. They have to do everything faster now before too many people figure out.
Exactly.
What's going to become evident.
There's a very interesting recent film that I watched called Heretic, and it's got Hugh Grant in it.
Oh, I've been wanting to watch it. I'm going to watch that soon.
Oh man, you have to watch this.
I told Maggie about it. We're going to watch it soon. So
this is a really quite a good film, and highly symbolic. The whole thing is an allegory, right? Essentially, you know, not spoiling it, but Hugh Grant is the demiurge, and he's you know, basically states to them, of course, you've got the Dante Alighieri's Tria Prima there, right, where he goes from hell to from Inferno, Purgatorio, and then Paradiso. So you've got that Tria Prima there of the sulfur, Mercury, and Sol, or whatever we want to call it as well, Vili, Ve, and Odin. And he says, you've got to go down to get out. When they say, well, how do we get out? Oh no, you can't get out of the front door because that's on a sort of timer, right? Yeah. And only I can open it. So now that you've been tricked into coming into this loop, the only way out of this place is because his cabin's on the edge of the mountain, is you've got to go down to get out, right? And of course, the mountain is associated with El Shaddai, Bel Shaddai, Shaddai, from the Akkadian of the mountain, the Emperor card, where the Emperor sits is the master of the ruins. All around him is this barren place where nothing grows, but he is sitting there proud in this sort of Aryan or Martian symbol of power. The folly of power, a sort of Ozymandias type of power. And that's what Zion means, by the way. A lot of people don't realize it, but it's a compound word, and it comes from Sia, or Si, which is quite literally barren or desert in Hebrew, and then On, which was the Hebrew transliteration of the Kemetic Yahweh or Yanu, which sounds very much like Yahweh, but it was in Kemetic it means pillars. And it was the holiest city that the Greeks knew as Heliopolis, or the city of the sun. This is another name they use for their utopia, by the way.
Well, remember earlier when I was like the animal wheel or animal circle actually is also, there's a word, Zio ion, that connects to this. Yeah. So.
Well, it was the same that we brought up with the ration, rat, eon, right? It's the same idea that the rat is this relentless force that feeds off, I guess, the waste of individuals. So it's the same. It's very much akin to George Bataille's work, which I would hope no one reads. It's absolutely horrific. It's very interesting, but God, oh my God, the guy is wow. How his mind worked, I can only, you know. Even just peering into the book, it was a bit of like it was like going into Hellraiser. I've just figured out the cube, and I forget what the name of the demons are, but they've took me into their world. I was like, oh my God, right? That's that finished. Never read that again. But
I know what you're talking about. I can't. Weren't there like oh shoot, dang, I can't remember the name of it actually. I knew that I feel like Thomas Sheridan brought them up during the lockdowns and stuff.
Yes, he did. Yeah, he did. As a sort of allegory.
Shoot, there goes my camera, boys, and I have to actually hop off here now. If you guys want to continue, go ahead. I have to actually run and get the girlfriend for more. So that's
all right. Yeah.
Well, good timing for me.
God bless you, Chris. Travel safe, travel well.
You know, I had
Hope you and your wife
I had
have a
a
lovely.
I had an amazing time. Awesome conversation. I'm so glad we did this for real. Silas, come back
So it's
anytime.
an
you
honor
have
having
this.
you, man. Big love to you and your missus. And I
Absolutely,
hope you
brother.
guys have a lovely romantic sunrise.
And we only have a few hours still.
It's gonna be sunrise there, isn't
It's
it?
only 2:30 a.m. right now, so 2:20. So
Okay.
it's so we got a little time. But Franklin, I will be on with you next week, I'm sure. Silas, come back anytime, have more discussion for
Yeah,
this. And if I
brilliant,
don't
yeah.
see you guys before that, hopefully maybe on the round table if I can get myself up on Saturday.
Big love, brother.
I
Okay.
I may exit as well. I'm going to get some breakfast.
Well, I was just getting to the point of like we're running out of time, so I'm
Yeah, I've
Perfect.
just realised the time as well.
Hey, we
Wow.
did a solid almost 4 hours, so that's a lot.
Yeah, no, definitely. We definitely dropped that bomb. But to everybody in the chat, I hope you guys got what you came for. I hope you enjoyed the show. Look forward to having you guys in future. And I suppose this conversation is going to have to sort of continue on. Probably the next step is going to be somehow relating to the morality of the story, which is in itself a huge discussion, I think, potentially, you know, in how maybe the hows of this process, you know, what it is that we can do as well, in order to, this word is a dodgy word, protect ourselves, you know, to keep ourselves stable and equilibrated in a world that wishes to disseminate and take us apart into pieces and keep us dysfunctional, and how to become more functional and more sort of in control of our choices and be able to become sovereign. You know, that's a word which I believe comes from the root of sober-minded, Jupiter. So, you know, the principles of being mentally sober and being able to be in control of the way in which we choose to relate to the reality that seems to be under control, but also transcends control, which is an interesting concept. Free will, I think, is a part of the discussion. What do you guys think as the natural progression of this conversation?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we've sort of highlighted and painted a picture of the control, but I think we have to discuss more of the mechanisms that we can explore and take and to perhaps, you know, parse this to overcome it, to transcend it.
100%. Silas, do you want to rejoin us next Tuesday?
Yes.
Or next Wednesday? It'll be Wednesday for you, I guess.
I'll say that tentatively I will be there, but something may come up. But I should be there. I should be there.
Awesome. All right, guys, I'm gonna hop out. You guys are awesome.
Well, big love to both of you. Namaste to everybody in the space. Take it easy, enjoy your day, and keep smiling. Remember, when you smile, the bones in your head contorts, and it puts pressure on these two bones. They put pressure on the pineal gland, the pituitary gland, cause a bit of secretion of the good juices, keeps you happy. And it also brightens up somebody else's day, which causes them to also contort the shape of their heads, putting a bit of pressure on the pineal and the pituitary, so that we can all live in a more positive and productive space. Big love, big blessings. Keep it sweet, keep it real. Bom Shiva.